All right guys, we're back today with another video. This one going over heating. Now most of your reptiles are gonna need some sort of supplemental heat because most of the time our house is a little bit too cool for our reptile friends. So I got a bunch of different options here to go over today, from some of your radiant options all the way up to heat bulbs and heat projectors. All right, so guys, since these want to run away from me, we're gonna go over the under tank heaters first. So these are a great option for a lot of supplemental heat. Most species aren't gonna work great for a primary heat source, but they do work good for your supplementals. You can stick these both on the side of an enclosure or on the underside of them, and they radiate heat typically through glass really well. PVC enclosures are probably not getting too much heat transfer, but on glass enclosures, these are great for supplemental heat. The biggest thing you want to know about these is you want to get a thermostat to regulate the temperature on these guys because they can run wild on you. There's a couple different brands out there. This is one of the ones we carry in our store. But again, get that thermostat on there so you can regulate the heat coming through your animal. You don't want it burrowing down and getting onto that under tank heater and really cooking itself. All right, so one of the great things about these under tank heaters, they come in a variety of different sizes. There's a critter keeper on the back of this one, so it's one of your smaller acrylic enclosures, as well as there's a size guide on the back of these to help you pick out the best size under tank heater for your enclosure. All right, so going on that radiant heat type of line, we got our radiant heat panels. So instead of under the enclosure on the side, these hang from the top. So these are really good for your PVC enclosures. You can mount these inside the enclosure. They do get warm, but because they're mounted on the top, not really a good place for the reptile to burn itself by spending long periods of time on it. It does create a good ambient temperature radiating down into the enclosure, creates a warm environment. These are really good for animals like snakes, where bright lights aren't the best way to keep them warm because it stresses them out, where you can still keep a good ambient heat on one side of the enclosure. All right guys, so still going on that radiant heat line, we have some of our deep heat projectors or infrared heat projectors. We've got two different brands here, there's a couple more out there as well. These are, again, another great supplemental source of heat. You can use these for night heat or ambient temperature control. Because they don't produce any visible light, a lot of your reptiles won't recognize them as a basking source though. So it does help bring up that ambient temperature, but not a replacement for a basking bulb. So just keep that in mind. Again, I recommend putting these on a thermostat because they can get very hot, and you want to keep these outside the enclosure because the surface of them gets very hot as well, can burn your reptile. All right, so now we have our light producing heat sources. We have our standard halogen bulbs, more of our flood style halogen bulb, and we have the nice fancy mercury vapor bulbs. Just kind of step ups here in my opinion. You got your standard halogen bulbs, create good heat. Your flood bulbs, a little bit stronger built, last a bit longer in my opinion for producing that heat over a longer period of time and creating more of a flood and a throw. These are good for larger enclosures. And then you have your mercury vapor bulb. Now, the cool thing about these is they actually produce heat as well as UVA and UVB. Now you always want to check these regularly with a UVB meter to make sure they're still producing heat or still producing UVB. They are said to last about a year, but always check that about your 6-month intervals to make sure they're still producing that proper UVB for your reptile if you are using it to replace your UVB bulbs. All right, so now we know how to make our enclosures hot, but how to regulate that temperature. You often read in your care guides about specific temperature ranges for your reptiles. This is how you maintain that. These thermostats plug in right to the heating source, as well as have a temperature probe that goes inside the enclosure, so you can measure that ambient temperature and those hotspot temperatures to a degree and keep that proper heat for your reptile. All right, so now you get your thermostat and your heat set up, but you also want to check the temperatures throughout your enclosures. These probes are going to measure the ambient temperature in a certain area of the enclosure around that probe. However, you have areas like hot spots, cool sides, and all those other things. You're gonna want something that's a good thermometer. These laser thermometers are really great. They measure surface temperature really well. Not gonna measure ambient temperature, but gets a good surface temperature read. It's really good for checking your hot spots, making sure you're not gonna burn your reptile. All right, guys, we went over a lot of things today. You notice we didn't include a heat rock. Think about heat rocks. They're very popular in the reptile industry. Fortunately, they're kind of phasing out. However, they're not really a good way to regulate temperature. There's no way to really hook a thermostat up to it and run it. So the surface temperatures kind of get out of control and they're burning the belly of your reptile because their temperature sensors are more on the top than on the bottom. So you're gonna burn your reptile with a heat rock. If you still have one, I'd cut the cord on it, use it as decorative, or go ahead and throw it away. All right, guys, there you have it. A bunch of options to heat your reptile enclosures as well as maintain those temperatures accurately with our thermostats and thermometers. We have all this stuff available at our 4 brick and mortar stores across the country, as well as our 250 reptile shows we have across the country. Check out details at showmereptileshow.com.